Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepless Creator. Tonight, I've brought you a calm, gentle story, a bedtime sleep story crafted for sleepless minds and restless hearts. This is more than just history for sleep. It's a soft-spoken escape into forgotten times and quieter worlds, designed to help you fall asleep fast. If your thoughts are racing, or if peace feels far away, you're in the right place. So close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let these sleep-inducing stories guide you gently into rest. Your quiet night begins now, with Sleepless Creator * Story 1. The Queen Who Bled for the Nile, Hatshepsut's Hidden Rituals, the Stones That Knew Her Name, * Good evening, friend, ... Dim your lights, let the sound of the day grow soft and distant. You are safe here, now wrapped in warmth, breath by breath. If it feels right, take a deep breath and let your body grow heavy against the bed. Let your eyelids rest like linen drawn across the face of time. If this slow journey brings you peace, consider tapping like and subscribe. Only if it feels right tonight, you and I will step into the dry hush of forgotten corridors, beneath a sky that once bowed only for gods. A time when the Nile whispered to the stones, and a woman ruled Egypt not as queen, but as pharaoh. Let's begin with dust. Warm, fine, clinging dust, the kind that gathers in hidden spaces, in temple cracks, under the gold of cartouches left unread for centuries. Imagine yourself kneeling before a sandstone block in the Valley of the Kings, brushing away ancient grains with soft horsehair. The heat here does not rot, rests on your skin like the weight of history. Before you, etched in ochre and faded malachite, is a name, Motker. Truth is the soul of the sun. A name not of a man, but of a woman, a queen who declared herself pharaoh. You will know her as Hatshepsut, but the stones, they knew her differently. You arrive at Deir el-Bahari, but centuries ago step backward, gently, into the breeze of 1470 BCU, are standing at the base of Hatshepsut's mortuary Temple Giza Jeseru, the Holy of Holies. It does not yet lie in ruin. There are no tourists here, no bleached ropes cordoning off entryways, no camera flashes, only the soft slap of sandals on stone, and the distant rhythmic song of reed workers on the Nile. The temple rises in terraces, clean and mathematical, an echo of divine order. Sunlight pours across limestone columns, each carved with silent stories. Pillars tell tales of divine birth, of journeys to Punt, of offerings brought forth by barefooted priests. You are not a visitor here. You are a lowly attendant. Your linen robes are coarse. Your job is simple, to sweep the lower causeway before sunrise prayers. Yet today, as your broom gathers palm fronds and sand, you hear soft footsteps above. You do not look up. Servants are not meant to raise their eyes to the divine. But still you listen. She walks differently than the priests. Slower, measured. Her feet glide. You know that walk. You've seen it in your dreams. The woman who wears the false beard of kingship, the scent of blue lotus, and Mirtha Queen smells of blue lotus. Always. It clings to her skin, her robes, her hair. Even now, decades after her death, faint traces linger in burial wrappings and alabaster jars in forgotten chambers. You cannot smell it today, but your mind can. Imagine it, rich, floral, and almost intoxicating. The oil was pressed by Temple. Women beneath her commands scraped from petals gathered in the sacred pools of Karnak. The queen did not only wear perfume, she commanded it. You once glimpsed her in the perfumery wing of the palace, seated beneath a painted ceiling of doves and palm fans, giving orders to a Nubian merchant about the strength of incense blocks. Too sweet, she had murmured, as if to herself, it must not smell of wanting. It must smell of memory. She meant ritual, remembrance, the scent of divinity, must linger long after the goddess has gone, and she believed herself divine, a queen among gods. But not in name alone you may know the broad strokes of her life, that she was born to married to her half-brother, Thutmose II, and that when he died young, she declared herself regent for the boy Thutmose III. Then slowly, over years, she became not the regent, but the king. But tonight, we care less for the courtly climb. Instead, let us sit quietly, unseen beside the rituals that allowed such a claim to stand. It began in darkness, when the blood fell for God's every new moon, while Thebes lay dreaming. A hidden ritual took place in the innermost chamber of the Karnak complex. It was called Pekeru, the House of Voice, where offerings were not just spoken, but enacted. Hatshepsut entered alone. No scribe recorded it. No hieroglyph bears direct witness, but fragments and astraca in whispered prayers on the inside. Of a mirror, lid suggests something peculiar. She bled, not from violence, but in sacrifice, in some ancient Egyptian rites. Menstrual blood, called the red flood of life, was believed to carry regenerative power. Most women were kept outside temple rituals during this time, but Hatshepsut, it seems, turned this rule upside down. She consecrated her blood as a heka, a force of sacred energy, in a bowl of carnelian red. Like the desert, she offered drops to the statue of Ammon, her divine father, born of the god. She would whisper, fed by the flame. It was not written, but it was remembered in the flicker of forbidden records, in private rituals performed by high priestesses centuries later, in the way her image was later chiseled away, not just from walls, but from memory itself. What power must she have summoned to be erased? A day of duties and silk-threaded silence in daylight. She played the pharaoh flawlessly, attending council in a pleated linen kilt, chin raised, voice calm. She consulted tax collectors, received tribute in the audience hall, listened to disputes about barley boundaries. All very ordinary, very stately. But then came the weaving hour at dusk. She would enter the queen's weaving room. This chamber was not public. It sat hidden behind the harem garden, cooled by water channels, shaded by pomegranate trees. Inside, the air smelled of linen and beeswax. You once saw her there, the queen of all lands, seated at a loom, not weaving, but watching. Young girls, no older than 12, worked threads into patterns older than memory. Hatshepsut would touch their shoulders gently, adjust their fingers. She believed the gods noticed cloth, especially what covered the statues in temples. Thread holds prayers, she once said. The gods feel through fabric what they ignore, in voice, and so she directed the weaving of her likeness. Thousands of cloths adorned her effigies, some fine, for the nobles to see, some plain, to dress her image in tombs none would visit. Her image was everywhere, until it was nowhere. What the scribes whispered, and the cat who listened you, are now seated in the scriptorium. Quiet, pillared room lined with scrolls. A tame temple cat is curled on a reed mat beside you. The scribes do not speak above a whisper. They record weather, grain measures, omens, dreams. But sometimes, between lines, they write symbols meant not for record, but for warning. One fragment from Hatshepsut's reign says, "When the Red Lady enters the holy chamber, know I shall follow. She speaks not in words, but in veins." Was it poetry? Was it code? No one knows, but it hints again at her private rituals, those no priest dared replicate. Was she communing with Amen or daring him? And so we come to the silence that followed her death. The chisels of erasure after her passing, the chisel men came. They worked slowly, carefully, not to destroy but to forget. Her images were not smashed but scratched out, her name replaced. Her statues buried, not broken. The act was not rage, but ritual, a quiet unmarking. To undo a name was to untether the soul, to deny Ka and Ba their reunification. Yet still her temple stood. Her cartouches remained in shadowed crevices. Her blood rituals, unrecorded, escaped erasure because no one dared inscribe them in full dot, in hiding. She lived. Even now, you feel her presence in the warmth of a carved stone, in the scent of dried lotus in forgotten jars, in the weight of silence. Between each hieroglyph, she is not gone. She is simply sleeping. And now the sun has lowered over Jeru. You have stood beside her shadows, felt the hush of her rituals, watched the light slip through limestone colonnades. She walks with you now just behind you, her footsteps soundless, her scent soft. The sleep that carried a crown, asterisk, you are lying beneath a sky without stars, beneath curtains of linen that whisper when you move. The air is thick with incense and frankincense, warming gently on a bronze burner beside your resting mat. Outside the stone walls of your chamber, the Nile flows silently in the dark, like breath beneath skin. And somewhere within the palace of Thebes, the most powerful woman in Egypt stirs in her bed of cedar. It is midnight, and Hatshepsut cannot sleep, but you were meant to follow her. Let us walk slowly now, barefoot through the moonlight halls of her chamber. The stone is cool beneath your soles. The oil lamps along the walls burn low, their flames curving softly toward the open air. Her attendants have long since withdrawn. Even the guard at her threshold dozes lightly, chin tucked. To his breastplate, you slip inside, quiet as thought, and you find her seated upright, still, eyes open. Not in her bed, but beside it. She is watching the shadow of a date palm sway against the wall. Her crown rests on a cushion of dyed wool. Her jewelry lies in neat rows beside a basin of crushed lotus pulp. She is alone with her silence, and that silence is ancient. The royal bed and the sleepless woman within it, the bed itself, is a wonder. Crafted from imported cedar from Byblos, lacquered in resin, inlaid with ivory lion paws. A small step stool allows her ascent, though she rarely uses it. The linens are woven in the weaving chambers you saw before, each sheet folded just so. The pillow stuffed with goose feathers. The room cooled with fluted water jars placed in niches around the walls. There is even a ceiling fanner, broad disc of palm fronds turned, gently by a servant during the hotter moons, but sleep eludes her. It always has. Hatshepsut's insomnia was not a secret. It was known by her physicians, by her steward, by her nurse, Cyterin. It was discussed not in terms of shame, but of divinity. Great ones, her steward once whispered, do not need the dreams of mortals. And yet, she longed for them, for the unbroken dream, the velvet descent into nothingness. She envied those who woke smiling, who murmured strange words about gardens that never existed. The priests told her dreams were omens, but she had none. An ancient cure, the dream stones of Fellenher. 14th year as pharaoh, Hatshepsut sent a silent request, sent on papyrus, but carved into obsidian and wrapped in red cloth. It was sent up the Nile to the temple of Isis at Philae, where priestesses kept the dreamstones. These were smooth ovals of quartz and serpentine, laid beneath the head while sleeping, said to open the eye of Horus within the mind. Most dreamstones were privately used, carved with prayers, anointed with lotus oil, placed beneath sleeping mats in homes of grieving mothers or traveling merchants. But the ones at Philae, they were sacred. When the box returned to Thebes, it was carried on foot in silence. Inside were 3 stones, one of river jade, another of moonstone, and one of obsidian dark as night. Each bore an inscription in microscopic detail. Let the soul see what the eyes cannot. The body is not where dreams dwell. Return to the field of reeds. That night, Hatshepsut lay one beneath her pillow, and dreamed her first. Dream in a decade, the scribes did not record the dream. But Senemet, her steward and most trusted advisor, left hints in his personal shrine long hidden in the cliffs behind her mortuary temple. There, carved inside the rock, are depictions of a boat adrift on a mirror-flat river. In the boat, a woman with shaved head and royal crook, staring into the black water. No sails, no oars, just silence. Beneath the image, a simple line of hieroglyphs. She crossed the dark, but did not speak. It was the only dream Hatshepsut ever mentioned aloud, and she spoke of it only once. Just before commissioning the carving of her Punt expeditioner voyage, she called a gift from Amen. But some believe it was a dream that showed her where to go. The dream scribe and the bed of sand moons later. Hatshepsut summoned a Rekhet Nasua, royal dream scribe, a woman, unusually from Nubia. Her name is forgotten, but her tools remain. They were found in a box buried beside the Queen's chamber decades ago. A thin reed brush, a dish of black ink, a woven mat of rushes, and a tiny sand dash bed. Yes, dash sand dot. The dream scribe did not write in scrolls. She poured soft white sand onto a low wooden tray and asked the Queen to place her hands in it, not to dig but to rest. Slowly, the imprint of her fingers emerged, the lines of her palm, the curve of her lifeline. Then the scribe would read not words, but silence, the depth of the imprint, the dryness of the sand, the movement of her fingers as she exhaled. She dreams of departure, the scribe once said, but her body is too heavy. Hatshepsut did not respond. But the next day, she ordered new chariots built, not for war, for retreat, the garden of the sleepless knot, far from the palace hidden behind rows of temple. Walls there was a garden none were permitted to enter without invitation. It was not vast, but carefully planned, a square of quiet green surrounded by baked brick walls, watered by a single channel drawn from the Nile dot. There were no date palms, no sycamores, only herbs, lemongrass, poppy, fennel, hyssop, coriander, blue lotus, and the sacred mandrake. This was her garden of sleep. She would walk here at dusk, barefooted, her shadow long across the tilled beds. She spoke to the plants, not in words, but in breath. She once instructed a gardener, do not touch the mandrake while it weeps. Let it speak first. He did not ask what she meant. The plants were used to steep her teas, to scent her bath water, to anoint her pillows. But more than that, they stood as symbols of stillness, of patience, of slow growing, the opposite of rule. A soft chamber where time forgot her. There is a room, even today, beneath the temple at Deir el-Bahar, sealed for millennia. It was discovered only by accident, behind a false wall. Inside, nothing but one mat, a low stool, and a wall painting of a woman kneeling beside an oil lamp. The paint was faded, the figure's face worn away, but beneath it, a poem. When light grows tired and eyes fall closed, the crown weighs less than it did at dawn. If no God visits, still let me be. If sleep does not come, still let me lie. It was not signed, but in the margin, barely legible, Motker, daughter of Ammon. She had a place where she could disappear, not as queen, not as God's wife, but simply as herself. In death, she slept at last. Hatshepsut's burial was delayed. Her body lay embalmed, wrapped, perfumed, but unburied for months. The tomb, Kivi 20, was carved deeper than most a spiral that plunged into bedrock, like the descent of thought into sleep. She was interred not alone, but beside her father Thutmose I. It is the only known double burial of its kind for Egyptian royalty. Her sarcophagus bore one last inscription, painted in lapis and gold, May. She drift in the field of reeds, where night does not hunger, where the soul walks backward through light and finds the moment before her crown. She had finally found rest. Even if history would later try to unwrite her, you have now walked through her sleepless nights, her gardens of stillness, her rituals of sand and scent and silence. You followed her dreams, soft, obscure, but enduring into the corners of time where her memory remains, even as her name was chiseled away. And now the oil lamps dim, the garden gates close, the queen reclines at last, her breath slow and even. Let the dreamstones do their work now. The silence that followed her name, asterisk, let us return, for a moment, to the desert. Not the desert of sweeping dunes and dancing mirages, but the high, stony desert that hems the Nile. Here the earth is brittle, cracked, and pale. You hear no voices, only the wind whispering through temple pylons long since shattered, and the wings of vultures circling above empty tombs. You are standing again above the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut, the Holy of Holies. It is now centuries. Later, her name has been scraped from the stone. Her statues lie toppled, buried beneath sand, or hidden behind fresh plaster painted with the cartouches of others. But still, the architecture remains. Angular, graceful, unlike any other temple of her age. The silence here is not absence, but preservation. A kind of waiting dot. Come, let's kneel beside one of the columns. Run your fingers across the faintest outline of a chisel mark, where once her title read Pharaoh of Upper and Lower Egypt. Now only traces remain. But tonight, in this gentle hour of forgetting, we will gather those traces and follow them into the shadows, into the stillness, into the life that echoed even after her name had been taken. The disappearance was not immediate. We often imagine historical erasure as sudden as, though the day after her death, her name was struck from every monument and her memory outlawed. But history does not move so cleanly. It took years at first. Her inscriptions were left untouched. Even Thutmose III, her stepson, continued her policies for some time. He built beside her, used her same labor force, honored many of her priests. There was even a brief period where their names appeared side by side. Only later, perhaps, 30 years after her death, did the chisels begin. But by then, her memory had already settled into quiet corners, in the minds of the priests, who still murmured her prayers before morning offerings, in the fingers of weavers, who still recalled how she taught them to twist gold into thread. And in the dreams of children who slept beside statues bearing her scent, a temple singer who remembered in the third generation after Hatshepsut's reign. A temple singer named Izzet recorded a series of dream fragments in a scratched, half-ruined papyrus scroll. Now kept in the Cairo Museum, in one fragment, she wrote, "The woman of no name visited me again. Her scent was cedar and crushed figs. She placed her hand on my head and said, 'They cannot bury breath.' No scholars can confirm the identity of the woman of no name, but the date of the fragment and the perfume description points quietly, gently, toward Hatshepsut. This was not the voice of a forgotten tyrant, nor the echo of a feared ruler. This was tenderness, memory, the survival of scent and gesture. Even without inscription, the apothecary of Elephantine, far south. On the island of Elephantine, near the border of Nubia, an old woman kept a clay jar, labeled Hekahemet, power of the blood. Inside was a bomb thick, dark, spiced, smeared onto the skin during full moons to bring strength, peace, and long dreams. This recipe was passed down through 6 generations of women healers, and though the label bore no royal symbols, some of the ingredients mirrored those listed in the temple inventories of Hatshepsut's reign: blue lotus, frankincense, myrrh, carob syrup, mandrake root. It is likely that this bomb centuries later was descended from her perfumery practices, even after her name was erased. Her rituals lived, not in scrolls, but in bodies, in the way skin remembered scent, the tomb that refused to be lost. Hatshepsut's original burial tomb, KV20, is one of the deepest ever carved in the Valley of the Kings. Its spiraling descent required light-bearers to guide every step. Even donkeys could not reach the final chamber. Later, pharaohs tried to cover it, to seal it, to fill it with rubble, but the shaft remained, open faint air rising from the bottom. Like a breath exhaled too late, workers sometimes claimed to hear faint chimes echoing from within, though there were no bells in the tomb. A myth grew around it, that whoever stepped inside would dream the dreams of kings, that sleep in that place would pull forth visions, not of gold or war, but of stillness, of a woman walking among columns with bare feet. No one said her name, but everyone knew the chiselman's regret, particularly moving Ostracana shard of pottery used for writing was found near Deir el-Medina, the workers' village for tomb builders. It reads, "My son asked who built the temple beyond the cliff. I said no one. He asked why it smells of flowers. I had no answer. It is unsigned, but its tone suggests guilt, perhaps from a worker who had helped erase Hatshepsut's name from her temple. There is no anger in his writing, only quiet bewilderment. The scent of blue lotus, it seems, lingered long after the woman who wore it had vanished. Sinomet's hidden shrines in Enmut, Hatshepsut's chief steward and likely confidant, had built a private chapel deep in the cliffs. It was incomplete when he died, or perhaps intentionally left so. The carvings are half finished, the columns unpainted, but on one wall, etched delicately, is the shape of a woman's hand. Nothing else. No title, no inscription, just the outline of a hand slender, curved. Regal. It is, said he traced it from memory, even after her name had been erased from public life. He left her a gesture, a ghost on stone, too quiet for the chisels to bother with. That hand has never been removed. The tomb of the unnamed weaver in the workers' cemetery. Far from royal tombs lies a small burial chamber marked only by a broken loom carved into a rough limestone slab. Inside, archaeologists found a single piece of woven linen wrapped around the body, stitched with gold thread in a pattern not seen since Hatshepsut's court, and tucked beside the bones, a spindle worn smooth. Whoever this woman was, she had once been a weaver for the queen. Perhaps she kept the cloth as memory. Perhaps she had asked to be buried in it. The gods may have forgotten Hatshepsut, but the hands that worked her cloth did not. The final inscription in dust centuries past. Dynasties fell, the Greeks arrived, the Romans, Christianity swept through, and temples turned to churches. The name of Hatshepsut was not just erased, but unpronounced. And then, in the early 1800s, a French expedition arrived in Egypt. A scholar named Jean-Francois Champollion knelt in front of a half-buried pylon in Thebes. He read a name, a strange one, Ma, single quotes at Kar. It had been left behind in a shadowed panel, too high for chisels, too faint for new paint. It would take years before her identity was confirmed, years before her story was pieced together from fragments. Jars, tombs, astraca, inscriptions, looms, perfumes, prayers, but in that moment forgotten by the world. But preserved by silence, her name was spoken again, and with it, a ripple, a return, reflection in the water. Reflection in the water now, return with me to the Nile. You are standing at the edge of the river, just before dawn. The air is cool, the reeds murmur, the water is still. You kneel and gaze into the reflection. For a moment you see her, not as pharaoh, not as deity, but as woman, wrapped in linen, walking barefoot through her garden, placing a dreamstone beneath her pillow. A woman who could not sleep, who dreamed only once, who ruled by breath and ritual and patience, and who, in the end, became more than memory. She became the space where memory breathes, and now we leave her. Let the garden grow quiet again. Let the oils cool. Let the spindle fall still. Let the scent of blue lotus fade into the folds of your blanket. Sleep, now, beside her. She will keep watch. Let's now wander into a different time, a different place. Story 2. A widow in white linen, anchor cinnamons, quiet letters, the girl beneath the gold mask, asterisk, and now. Let's drift into a new corner of forgotten history. ... Make yourself still again. Lay back into the hush. Let the fabric around you soften, and listen to the wind as it might have sounded through a high window in Akhetaten thousands of years ago. A window above a sandstone palace. A wind that carried not only dust, but the weight of secrets. We return now to the end of a dynasty, the end of a childhood, and the beginning of a silence that stretched for centuries. Let me take you to the feet of a girl whose name once echoed through the great court of Egypt, and then was lost to wind and time. Her name was Ankhesenamun. You may not know her, but you have seen her husband. You have seen his gold mask, that eternal boy king, Tutankhamun. But this is not his story. This is hers. She was born into light and darkness. The first thing you must understand is this. Ankhesenamun was born into a world that was no longer Egypt as it had been. Her father, Akhenaten, had torn the kingdom from its ancient gods and bent it toward the singular worship of Aten, the solar disk. Imagine her early years. She grows up in Akhetaten, the newly built capital, where walls are painted not with Osiris and Anubis, but with golden rays of the sun extending hands toward the royal family. The city gleams in the light. priests are quieted. Statues of old gods are destroyed. She is the third daughter of Queen Nefertiti and Akhenaten. Her name means she lives through Amen. Ironic, since her father had erased that very god from Egypt's temples. Her childhood is filled with song, incense, and ritual, yes, but also with fear. The divine order of Egypt, Marat, has been broken. Even as a girl, she is trained in stillness. In smiling through change, the shadow of the Aut every morning, she bathes in rose water poured by silent servants. She is dressed in linen so sheer, it disappears in sunlight. Her sandals are white leather, her head shaved, a blue crown painted on her skull. She does not play like children do in common homes. Her play is ritual, pouring libations to the Aten, practicing posture before golden statues, learning how to press her hands in prayer, perfectly aligned. She walks behind her parents in ceremonies. She watches as her sisters are married, off to high-ranking advisors, and even to her father himself. Incest, in this royal line, was custom. It was said to preserve divinity. She does not yet know that her fate will be no different. Married to a god-boy when she is no more than 13, her father dies. A brief chaos follows. Then comes the boy, Tutankhaten. Just a child, he is crowned pharaoh. And she, his half-sister, is married to him. They are both children, lost in ceremony too large for their names. Imagine their palace, high ceilings, gilded furniture, the scent of myrrh heavy in the air, but at night the corridors echo. The boy is often ill, his spine curved, his steps unsteady. She sits beside him with a cool cloth, speaks little. He coughs blood into embroidered linens, and she watches it soak the gold thread. Still, she smiles for the sculptors. Still, she wears the urious serpent upon her brow. Still, she says the words during temple rites, because Egypt must believe the gods are pleased, and the gods must never. See fear, the letters that never slept. Among the most haunting artifacts in all of ancient history are not monuments or crowns, but letters, written on thin slivers of clay, dried in the sun, and one of them found not in Egypt, but far to the north in the archives of Hattusa. The Hittite capital holds her voice, the voice of Ankhesenamun. It is known as the Dekamunzu letter. In it, a queen of Egypt named, but clearly from this period writes to the Hittite king Suppiluliuma, my husband has died. I have no son. They say you have many sons. If you send me one of your sons, I shall make him king of Egypt. Never shall I take one of my servants and make him my husband. I am afraid. This letter was real. This letter was desperate, and it was never meant to be found. What made her so afraid? Historians have debated for years. Who was she afraid of? The most likely answer, Tutankhamun's vizier, an older man, a servant of the royal family. Perhaps her grandfather, certainly her political captor. He likely sought to marry her after Tutankhamun's death, to legitimize his own claim to the throne. She did not want this. She was perhaps still only 17. So she reached across empires, begging for a foreign prince to come save her from her own court. It was a bold move, and a fatal one. The prince, who never reached her Suppiluliuma, surprised by her request, did send a son, but the boy never made it. He was killed en route to Egypt, likely by agents loyal to The letter's reply was never written. Ankhesenamun was given no choice. Within months, she was married to Her name appears on a ring beside his, carved hastily. It is the last known record of her. No tomb, no shrine, no mourning slept, just silence. The linen that bore her name in the ruins of Tutankhamun's tomb, discovered intact by Howard Carter in 1922. Archaeologists found many treasures, among them a folded length of white linen, placed carefully beside the boy king's golden coffin. On the linen, written in ink, a single phrase: "Beloved of Enkizaman." She had wrapped him. She had stood in the burial chamber, while priests muttered spells, and wrapped the frail body of her husband with her own hands. This was not a servant's work. This was a queen's farewell, a final moment of choice, before the world turned dark around her. The silence that followed Ankusnan vanished. No tomb, no body, no further letters. She was absorbed by the shadows of A's reign, then forgotten entirely by Horemheb, the general who followed him. Horemheb erased the Amarna line altogether, resetting the dynasty, chiseling names from walls, replacing gods, rewriting records, and yet she remains in the letter held in a clay archive, far from Egypt, in the white linen pressed between layers of golden wrappings, in the ring that no longer fits any royal narrative. She remains in absence, and absence can be a kind of presence now. You lie still, as she once did. You listen to the wind through tall reeds, and the murmur of prayers she may have whispered in the dark. Her name, once spoken by the gods, now floats between layers of silence. The hands that wrote in clay asterisk imagined dusk falling gently over Akhetaten. The sun lowers behind the flat-roofed palaces, and warm light slants across colonnades once walked by Nefertiti's daughters. The air hums with cicadas. In the garden, date palms stir, and a servant draws a screen of woven reeds to keep the gnats from the queen's chamber. But you are not in the palace this evening. You are far to the north, in the rocky heights of Anatolia, because the words of Anki Sonaman, words spoken in fear, in desperation, have travelled farther than any chariot ever carried her. They crossed mountains, forests, rivers. They survived time, theft, war, and centuries of forgetting. And even now, as you lie still, they are waiting to be heard again. Let us begin with clay, a letter not carved, but pressed in like Egypt's scrolls of papyrus. The Hittites wrote on clay tablets. The letters were wedge-shaped, carved with reeds into soft earth, then dried in the sun or baked in fire. The queen's message, the famous Dukamanzu letter, was written on such a slab, not by her own hand, but by a scribe trained in royal phrasing. Still, the tone is unmistakably hers, and in its very brevity, you feel the pulse of real fear. My husband is dead. I have no son. They say you have many sons. Send me one. But there is a line that lingers, long after the rest fades. I am afraid. She is not pleading for empire, nor alliance. She is pleading for escape. Who was she writing to? The Hittites were no minor power. They rivaled Egypt in military strength and controlled a vast territory that stretched across what is now Turkey and Syria. Their king, Superlulium I, was old, wise, and ruthless. His sons were many, trained in war and diplomacy. One of these, Prince Zanza, was chosen to respond. But between the queen's letter and the prince's arrival lay a tangle of weeks, enough time for Egyptian resistance to rise. The powerful vizier was likely already making his claim to the throne, and he could not allow a foreign prince to undermine it. The prince never arrived, or, more accurately, he arrived in pieces, a scribe in Hattusa, and the words he couldn't forget in the capital of the Hittite Empire, Hattusa. A royal scribe named Tanusha kept a private clay tablet, buried in a side chamber behind the state archives. It was found in the early 20th century, broken in 3 parts, each one sealed with his personal mark. On the tablet, she asked with trembling fingers, her words bent the air. A queen with no name, seeking a throne with no breath left in it. This was not an official record. This was grief, even far from Egypt. Her plea stirred sorrow and respect. She had dared what no Egyptian queen before her had done. Sought refuge in the arms of a rival king, and for that, her name was excised from history. Back in Egypt, a marriage etched in stone. Then forgotten, the last time we see her name clearly is on a ring carved in electrum, the pale blend of gold and silver, given as a token of royal betrothal. The ring bears two cartouches, side by side, and Kizenomen, they are delicately carved, with a reed and B for king, and the vulture and snake of queenship. But even in that carving there is distance. The names are not entwined. There is no shared title. It is as if she were already fading. The days after the funeral to Tunken's burial was a rushed affair. His tomb, smaller than most, was likely not intended for a king. But he died suddenly, and arrangements had to be made quickly. And Kizenomen was involved. We know this from artifacts in the tomb, the linen bearing her name, the presence of private amulets believed to have been placed by a wife, not a priest. But after that, silence. There is no record of her attending public ceremonies, no mention in the inscriptions. I later had carved on his own tomb walls. She had become invisible, and yet her legacy is not one of absence. The hidden mirror in a chamber beneath the temple of Ammon at Karnak. A polished bronze mirror was found in 1898. It had no gold, no jewels, just a plain ivory handle and a lotus-shaped base. But upon cleaning it, a curator discovered a name incised along the edge of the reflective surface. Not a full cartouche, just a handful of glyphs. Ankh-Es-N-Amun, beloved of life. This mirror had likely been part of her private chamber, perhaps a gift from her mother, perhaps a tool of simple vanity. But its survival says something unexpected, that even when she was erased from monuments, someone kept her reflection, someone remembered her face. The widow's garden behind the palace at beyond the painted colonnades and the cooling pools, lay a garden planted with white acacia, henna, sweet rush, and myrtle. Archaeological traces show that, after Akhenaten's death, the garden was neglected, but not entirely abandoned. A later phase of planting took place, and in the center, buried beneath layers of silt and thyme, was found a single wooden tag, carved crudely, Ankh alone. Planting was at hers. Perhaps a servant marked her work, or perhaps, in solitude, the widow came here to tend what would outlive her. In the hush of the reeds, among the bees and dust, she found the one act the court could not script: growth. A face rediscovered in 2010. The Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities published findings on a female mummy from tomb KV21. The body had been disarticulated, damaged, her face crushed, but forensic reconstruction suggested she was of royal blood. From the 18th dynasty, DNA testing later revealed that this woman was likely the mother of the 2 stillborn daughters buried with Tutankhamun. And so the evidence grew. This broken body, the lost letters, the linen wraps together. They whispered a name, and Kizenomen, still here, still breathing through dust. What her letters tell us, that her monuments never could. The great queens of Egypt left towering temples, Hatshepsut, Nefertiti, Cleopatra, but Ankhesenamun left almost nothing, except her words in the letter to the Hittite king. We see not divinity, but dread, not command, but fear, not glory, but vulnerability, and that in the ancient world may be the most human monument of all, because she was not merely a queen, not just a political pawn, not just a link in a shattered dynasty. She was a voice, and in the hush of a palace corner you can still hear it. I am afraid, not for herself alone, but for her people, her country, her name, now in your own. Silence, you can almost feel the weight of the stylus in her fingers, the dryness of the clay, the stillness of the night she wrote. The name that nearly vanished, asterisk, you are lying still now, wrapped in the hush of dusk, the kind of silence found only in great halls long abandoned. In your mind, you stand again within the palace of Akhetaten, but all the murals have faded. The plaster cracks. The scent of kifi and lotus is replaced by dry stone. You hear no footsteps, and yet she is still here. Ankhesenamun, a name once uttered beside gold thrones, now barely visible in the dust. But tonight, we follow it, not to a tomb, not to a monument, but to the fragile places where memory outlives stone. Let us return to the silence that followed her last letter, and see where, if anywhere, she was allowed to rest. The vanishing queen of... Her name appeared alongside that of I, the new pharaoh, Ankhesenamun, disappeared from official record. There were no royal decrees bearing her seal, no temple dedications, no funerary temple, no lavish tomb. This was unusual. Even queens, who had married politically, even those pushed into royal unions, were afforded memorial stele, or burial rites. But in her case, there is simply nothing, as though she was meant to be unremembered, and yet the act of forgetting can leave traces, like footprints erased in sand. The impression lingers, a funeral not fit for a Queen Egyptian burial. Customs were elaborate, especially for royalty. Every rite was designed to preserve the name, for in the Egyptian belief system, to be remembered was to remain alive in the afterlife. If Ankhesenamun was not given a tomb of her own, if her name was not inscribed in gold or stone, then where did her spirit go? Some scholars have speculated that she may have been buried hastily, even secretly, in a reused chamber. One theory suggests KV63, a small undecorated tomb discovered near Tutankhamun's, may have held her, or at least her funerary items. Among the embalming materials found there were fabrics bearing signs of feminine ownership, fragments of linens embroidered with fine edging, bits of resin-scented bandages, and canopic jars lacking inscriptions. A burial without a name, without a voice, without closure. Her name broken on a shardan, a trash pit near the workers' village of Deir el-Medina, a small ostrakon, a pottery. Shard used for casual notes was found in 1924. It bore just 2 words in a woman's handwriting, Ankhesenamun. The rest was broken. Was it a note, a discarded prayer, a servant scribbling memory? No one knows, but the gesture itself of writing her name speaks. Even decades after her disappearance, someone remembered. Someone said her name aloud, and, in the ancient Egyptian understanding of immortality, this small act was enough to stir the soul, to life again. If only for a moment. The temple with no name archaeologists exploring the lesser courtyards of Karnak found, hidden, behind a collapsed outer wall, a miniature shrine. Just one chamber. Within, a seated statue of a queen. The face had been worn away by time, not violence. But around her ankles, faint inscriptions remained. One read, "Beloved of the boy king." No queen of Egypt had ever been called this before, nor since. The shrine held offerings, dried lotus petals, crumbled alabaster vials once filled with perfumed oil, and the remnants of a gold-plated mirror. All signs pointed to one name, unspoken, but persistent. Ankhsenamun, the midwife's tabletty, singular and unexpected source of insight into her later life was discovered not in a tomb or archive, but in a midwife's toolkit, in the ruins of a domestic home just outside Thebes. A clay tablet was found wrapped in a protective reed bundle. On it, a woman named Merit, listed as a royal midwife, recorded notes on births, herbs, and postnatal care. Among her entries, Year 4 of the new King I. The widow has bled too long. No child quickens. She dreams of crossing. It is unclear who the widow refers to, but the timing is significant. Merit's location near the palace, and her connection to high-status clients, lends weight to the theory. If this was Ankhsenamun, she may have miscarried or fallen ill. The language is soft but tragic, and the final phrase, "She dreams of crossing," evokes not simply death, but the passage into the afterlife. Still, no tomb confirms this. We are left only with fragments, a thread in Tutankhamun's bandages in 2015. Conservators re-examining the wrappings of Tutankhamun's mummy discovered something strange. Among the layers of bandages around his chest, beneath the golden resin, was a tiny twist of blue thread, knotted in the pattern used by women in the Amarna period for securing hair. This was not a ritual, not dot. This was personal. Perhaps it had fallen there accidentally, or perhaps she placed it there herself. A final gesture, a token of touch, woven quietly into the wrappings. Beneath all official notice, it would never have been seen, except by the gods, or you, here now. The daughters who never spoke to Tutankhamun and Ankhsenamun had 2 stillborn daughters. Both were buried in their father's tomb, a rare and deeply personal gesture. Tiny coffins, miniature canopic jars. Their names never recorded, but they were not discarded. Their presence in KV62 suggests that despite the political pressures and religious chaos of their time, these children were mourned, handled with care, grieved. We cannot know what names Ankhsenamun whispered over their linen-wrapped forms, but the silence of those little coffins speaks louder than most monuments. She was not only a queen, she was a mother, the legacy of a vanished line. The end of Ankhsenamun marked the collapse of a dynasty. The royal line of Amarna, once so radiant, revolutionary, and strange, ended with her. No heirs survived, no royal blood continued. I ruled briefly, then was succeeded by Horemheb, a general with no direct claim. Horemheb erased their names from temples, shattered statues, rewrote the lineage to begin with himself, and so, for millennia, Ankhsenamun was a ghost. Until archaeology, linguistics, and persistence began to resurrect her. Not with grandeur, not with gold, but with letters, linen, clay, and silence. Reflection in the still waters. Now you walk beside the riverbank where no monuments rise. The sun has long since set. The Nile laps softly at stone. In your hand you hold something invisible, the final fragment of her name. Say it, if only once. Into the darkness, Ankhsenamun, the name of a girl queen who loved a boy king. who wrote across empires, who pleaded with enemies, who buried her daughters in silence, and who left behind not glory, but the kind of memory that lives not in books, but in the hush. Between stories, let the reeds sway now. Let the scent of distant lilies fill the air. Let her rest at last, not in a royal tomb, but here beside you in stillness. She has found a listener, and that is enough. Let's now wander into a different time, a different place. Story 3. The Wives Who Waited. Secrets of the Royal Harem at Gurapayhend. The Reed Curtain, asterisk, good evening, dear friend. Settle in now, and let the night wrap gently around your thoughts, like linen on cool skin. Dim the lights. Draw your blanket. Close. This story is slow, like the rustle of woven reeds, like the hush of footsteps on polished limestone. We are returning to the desert again, not to a palace, nor to a battlefield, but to a compound walled in silence, wind and waiting. Come with me now to a place few ever entered willingly, the Pakanaret, the house of the royal women. The harem, far from the throne, it lies on the edge of the desert near the Fayum Basin, a fertile crescent west of the Nile where reeds grow tall, crocodiles drift silently, and soft winds brush the wheat. The site was once called and later Gurab, but what it truly was to those who lived inside was a palace of echoes, a place where queens and wives, concubines and daughters lived lives that were luxurious, yes, but deeply, deeply confined. They were kept in the shade of Pharaoh's attention, like lotus blossoms pressed between pages, and they waited for a summons, for favor, or for history to forget them. Not a prison, not a paradise. We imagine harems through modern fantasies, soft cushions, perfumes, dancing girls, but the reality was neither romantic nor cruel. It was, still, imagine it, a long, rectangular compound surrounded by high, whitewashed walls, topped with broken glass to keep intruders out. Inside, open courtyards shaded by tamarisk trees, colonnaded walkways, pools lined with blue-glazed tiles. Women moved through the space slowly, not in fear, but in repetition. Ritual. They were not prisoners, but they were not free. Their lives were measured in gestures. A comb passed between hands, a linen robe folded just so, a prayer murmured. At dawn, and above all else, they waited. The women of the Hausam were foreign princesses, sent from Mitanni, Nubia, or Hatti as diplomatic brides. Others were daughters of local officials, offered to the pharaoh as tokens of loyalty. The select few were true royal wives. But within these walls, rank blurred, they all lived according to a strict code of behavior. They learned music, languages, dance, perfume making, and embroidery. Even more important was silence. To be too loud, too curious, too memorable was dangerous. So most of them perfected the art of vanishing in plain sight. They became shadows, the rooms, without names, very few personal names survive from the harem at Gurab. This was intentional. Most rooms were marked not with the name of the occupant, but with a role: singer of the interior, nurturer of the flower, watcher of the basin, bearer of linen. Even the queen mothers, like T, the powerful matriarch of Amenhotep III, spent their twilight years in such compounds, beneath titles that sovereigned their sovereignty. Power here was whispered, not declared, but it pulsed like oil beneath. Sand. The Secret of the Wooden Heading, 1904. Archaeologists unearthed a small, haunting object at Gurab, a carved wooden head of a woman. The eyes were inlaid with obsidian, the lips parted, the expression not serene, but watchful. No name accompanied it, but the artistry suggested high status, perhaps a queen or royal concubine. The style dated to the 18th dynasty. Some believe it may depict Kia, the lesser wife of Akhenaten and rival of Nefertiti. Others suggest it's a portrait of Nabita, daughter of Queen T, hidden from the court for reasons lost to time. The head was found not in a burial, but buried, in a wall niche hidden, not entombed. Why? Because memory, in this place, was both currency and curse. The children of the harem boys born to harem women were often sent away at a young age, to military schools or priestly training. But the girls, they stayed. They were trained to replace their mothers, to sing, to dance, to paint ceremonial jars, to prepare their hands for the slow ritual of unguents and linens. Their futures were fixed, long before their first braids were tied. But some found ways to leave their mark. A small fragment of a limestone tablet from Gurab lists a Satmut weaver of the moon thread. Her signature appears 3 times on scraps of court embroidery found in a tomb near Thebes. She lived quietly. She worked, and her hands outlasted her name. The garden, with no visitors within the compound, was a private garden. Long, narrow, shaded. Was not for show. It was where the women walked when they needed to feel the air on their skin, where they practiced silent breathing exercises, where they dreamed. Beneath a sycamore tree, someone carved into the trunk, "I have stood still here. Every day the tree does not change, but I do." There is no record of who wrote it, but they left a mark deeper than any cartouche. The queen who disappeared twice among the most mysterious harem residents was Queen Nebetenhat, the lady of the house. She appears in only one official record, a broken stela showing her seated beside Amenhotep III beneath the Aten sun disk. Then she vanishes, not dead, not disgraced, just moved. It is believed she was relocated to Gurab in the late years of the pharaoh's reign. Perhaps due to court intrigue in Gurab, she may have lived another decade. A fragment of linen, labeled for the lady's shade, was found in a storage jar. The fabric had been repaired 3 times, suggesting long use, careful preservation, a quiet persistence. The reed curtainy residents in Gurab had a doorway with a woven reed curtain, not for decoration, but to keep the light from entering too fast and to muffle sound. Women passing from chamber to chamber learned to part the curtain without rustle. A practiced hand could do it in complete silence. The curtain became a symbol of the place. Itself, a barrier that was not quite a wall. History has only rarely passed through it, but tonight you have, and behind it you find women who were not merely wives or symbols, but keepers of the day-to-day breath of Egypt now. Rest, the night grows long. You've stepped through the reed curtain. You've listened to the hush between footfalls. You've walked beside the weavers and dancers, the queens, with no tombs and the daughters with no prayers. Songs for an empty throne, asterisk, and now the night grows softer still. You are lying beside cool limestone walls. The only sound is a woman humming, low, repetitive, barely audible above the breeze. Somewhere nearby, a bowl of oil crackles as the wick burns low. In another chamber, a girl braids her hair in silence. You are still within the royal harem at Gurab, but now we step into the secret music of the place, the routines, rituals, and rhythms that held these women steady. Even as the world beyond, the walls shifted with each new pharaoh dot here. Time did not rush forward. it circled, like a melody played for no audience but memory itself. The daily hours of a forgotten queendom begins not with sunlight, but with scent, before first light. Junior attendants rise to crush myrrh pods and mix resin with water. Incense is burned before the household shrine, usually for Hathor, goddess of beauty, music, and protection. The chief queen, if one resides in the compound, is awakened not by words, but by the brushing of linen over her hands. She is bathed, anointed, and dressed by silent women. No one speaks unless necessary. There are rules for this to speak to. Soon is to unbalance the day. To let sound break stillness is a kind of breach. Education in the garden. Shade after the morning meal. Usually figs, flatbread, and diluted date wine. The younger girls are brought to the shaded colonnades for study. They learn hieroglyphs using wax tablets and wooden styluses. They read hymns aloud, but softly from copies of the instructions of Ani and the hymn to the Nile. One girl, known from fragmentary records as Maranith, was praised by her scribe for her graceful memory. A scrap of her writing survives a single phrase, repeated 6 times. I write not for others to read, I write to hear myself think. Her tablet was burned and buried with her. Some say this was a rare honor. The music. Room with no audience, one of the best preserved rooms at Gurob was a music chamber. Its walls were painted with faded images of harps, flutes, and hand drums. But what scholars noticed most was the acoustic's perfect resonance, even in the smallest whisper. Inside, a group of women practiced regularly, the Hesed singers. They were trained not for public performance, but for private ceremony to soothe, to praise, to heal. They sang for the gods. They sang for each other. They sang when new girls arrived. They sang when old ones died. One verse, preserved in red ochre on plaster, reads, "We do not raise the dead, but we keep them from falling farther." The woman with a painted box in a chamber near the eastern corner of the compound. Archaeologists uncovered a wooden box painted with delicate images, a mirror, a small table, and a single water lily dot. Inside were scraps of cloth, cosmetic applicators, tiny glass beads, and a rolled parchment scroll, disintegrated by time, but once containing prayers. On the inside of the lid, a name, scratched in with a reed, Tia, to be beautiful for the gods. Tia is otherwise unknown, but her box speaks for her. She was not royalty, likely a singer or chambermaid, yet her box was placed beneath a painted arch, a miniature shrine. Someone honored her, someone remembered her. Whispers of entreated harems were not always quiet sanctuaries. They could be politically charged, especially when succession was uncertain. One of the most infamous episodes in Egyptian court history is the harem conspiracy, a plot during the reign of Ramesses III, in which one of his lesser wives attempted to install her son on the throne by orchestrating the king's assassination. While this event occurred later than the height of Gurab's activity, it reveals what women behind palace walls were capable of, organizing, persuading, even coordinating with soldiers and scribes. Some historians believe Gurob served as a model or a warning for such later harems. Power here did not vanish, it merely waited, the letter that crossed the Sandamon. The archives discovered in nearby El Wahon was a papyrus with a single royal seal. It was a message addressed not to a court, nor a governor, but to a woman, to the Lady of the Lotus House. From the first scribe of the Temple of Sobek, the linen has arrived. The oils are sweet. The songs you sent were heard. We remember you. Scholars cannot agree on who this woman was. But the letter confirms one thing. Communication between Gurab and the outer world existed selectively, carefully. And when a woman inside those walls reached beyond them, her offerings were noted, not dismissed. A burial in shadow, one of the most poignant finds at Gurab, is a small shaft tomb, unmarked, containing the wrapped remains of two women. They were buried, head to head, facing each other, with arms gently folded across their bodies. No jewelry, no gold, just a faience scarabs placed between them. One bore the glyph for listen, the other wait. Their names are unknown, but their burial was tender, not discarded. Perhaps they were friends, perhaps lovers, perhaps simply women who had waited so long they could only leave together. What the walls remember, the walls of Gurab speak more clearly than its scrolls. On the lower levels of plaster in certain rooms, beneath later whitewash, archaeologists have found layers of painted vines, looping patterns, and even initials scratched beneath glaze. They speak of women who marked their presence, even subtly. One corner bore the repeated symbol of a basket. Beneath a star, a hieroglyph combination that means to gather memory. That, perhaps, is what they did here. Not reign, not seduce, not scheme, but gather the threads of Egypt's royal memory and preserve it within themselves as singers, as mothers, as silent watchers of the throne. Close your eyes, you can still hear them if you listen. The low rhythm of footsteps on sanded floors, the hush of a curtain brushed aside, a phrase whispered in devotion, "Let the throne be steady, even if I am not seen." Threads that outlived a dynasty asterisk, you are lying beneath painted beams, their colors faded with centuries of sighs. The scent of old oil and softened wood lingers. Somewhere, water drips from a broken basin. The night air is still, and within the stillness, the women of Gurab remain not as ghosts, but as impressions. The pressure of presence, the sound a hand makes when resting on a linen bedspread, the whisper of a name never spoken again. This final chapter is not about queens or scandals. It's about what remains, a fragment of a life in the museum storerooms of Cairo. There is a strip of linen barely 6 inches wide. Faint lines run across. It faded red ink, barely legible. It was found at Gurab in a crumbled storage jar with broken combs and bone needles. But what was written on it startled archivists. "May Bastet guide my hands and keep my stitching straight. Let no thread forget its path." This was not a spell. It was a note to self, a daily mantra whispered not to the gods, but to a woman's own trembling fingers. Whoever she was, seamstress, singer, mother, she left behind not gold, but a breath of determination. The room of quiet, Repousse-Gurab, had a chamber referred to by its later excavators as the needle room. It was where torn garments were mended, wigs rebraided, sandals resoled, and linens washed and folded. But it was more than a workshop. This was where women exchanged silent glances, passed private stories, and stitched their presence into the physical memory of the place. One wall bears a single carving, a lotus opening beneath a crescent moon. Beneath it, scratched faintly, "Neforu did not speak today." Nothing else, but in that line lies a small ache, a trace of isolation, a record of absence. The woman with ink-stained fingers among the rarest of harem positions was that of Seshat's hand, a female scribe, allowed to record inventories, copy hymns, and maintain correspondence. One such woman at Gurab, known only by her seal Kenmetneb, handled temple accounts and managed fabric quotas. A tablet fragment in her chamber reads, "I write with humility, for I am not remembered. But I remember everything." She would have held the names of every resident, every offering, every spool of linen. Her hand did not carve into stone, but into time, because it was she who saw to it that no girl's name was forgotten while ink still flowed. Threads from foreign lands, the women of Gorob came from many places: Kush, Syria, Mitanni, Libya. Some came as brides, others as hostages. All were woven into the royal fabric, sometimes quite literally, in the ruins of a textile storehouse. Archaeologists found bolts of cloth-bearing weaving techniques unknown to Egyptian tradition, knotted loop patterns, ochre-dyed edges, geometric motifs more common in northern Canaan. These were likely created by the hands of women far from home. One such bolt bore an inked name in a non-Egyptian script, possibly Luwian. It was translated decades later. She made this, though. Her heart was in her father's house. Even in thread, they stitched longing. A funeral, unlike the others, most harem women were buried simply. But in 1920, a burial chamber was uncovered beneath the northeast corner of the Gorob compound. It held a single wooden coffin, unpainted except for a lotus blossom at the head. The woman inside had been carefully wrapped between each layer of linen. Dried flowers had been placed, blue lotus, thyme, and tamarisk. Around her wrist, a simple cord tied in 7 loops, and between her fingers, a small wooden stylus. Who was she? No name, no cartouche, no titles, but everything about her burial suggested love. Perhaps she was their teacher, or the keeper of their names. The last offering, long after Gorob fell out of use. A visitor left something behind atop the broken steps. Near what was once the main entrance, someone laid a flat stone. On it, a carved image of a woman, eyes closed, hands folded. Around the edges, scratched in crude demotic script. She kept the women safe. She remembered the songs. She did not leave. This was not an ancient dedication, likely placed during the late period or even later, but it tells us that, for someone, the memory of Gorob's silent guardians persisted, not as royal wives, but as caretakers of stillness. Gorob's quiet end, the compound at Gorob, was gradually abandoned. Floodwaters rose from the Fayum, trade routes shifted, dynasties crumbled. The walls, once painted with vines and feathers, cracked and fell, but in the dust, seeds remained. Archaeologists found remnants of a herb garden, the roots of sweet flag, papyrus, and calendula. Someone had tended them, even as the outer world forgot. The lesson in waiting, we think of history as kings and wars, dates and edicts, temples and tombs. But sometimes it is a linen scrap in a jar, a carved comb, a reed curtain, a woman's name spoken only once, in a letter, in a lullaby, in a thread. The women of Gorob did not seek greatness. They were not worshipped. They did not rule. But they remembered, and in their memory, Egypt remained whole. Close your eyes, now. The music has stopped. The last wick has burned low. The girls have all gone to sleep. You are the only one still awake. But in your stillness, you have seen them, and that is how they survive. Let's now wander into a different time, a different place. Story 4. The Silent Veil, the secret mourning rituals of Queen Marasank, Ether, quiet shadow of royal grief. Asterisk, good evening, friend. Dim your lights now and settle under a warm blanket. The world outside your window grows hushed, and we are about to enter a realm of soft shadows and whispered rites. The hidden morning rituals that surrounded one of ancient Egypt's most mysterious queens, Marasank III. Here, sorrow was not loud or grandiose, but slow, intimate, and filled with subtle meaning. The palace that wept in silence, you find yourself wandering the long, cool corridors of the royal palace in Giza. Some 4,500 years ago, the air is thick with the scent of lotus flowers and freshly ground incense. Heavy curtains of fine linen hang from cedar beams, muffling the footsteps of servants and family alike. Within these walls lived Marasank III, granddaughter of Pharaoh Khufu, the great pyramid's builder, a queen whose life was threaded with privilege, duty, and a grief so deep it shaped the very fabric of her household. She was known as the Great One of the Heat Scepter, a title of both reverence and mystery. But beneath the golden jewelry and embroidered linens, Maraysong's heart bore losses not recorded in stone, but carried quietly by those who loved her. The ritual of the veil when a royal passed away. Egyptian tradition called for mourning that stretched across days and even weeks. For a queen, the ritual was more than public display. It was a sacred, repetitive choreography designed to carry the soul safely into the afterlife and to comfort the living. Marasank was said to have observed a private mourning ritual involving a silent veil, a fine, nearly transparent linen cloth dyed a deep blue-black, worn draped over the head and face during moments of solitude and remembrance. Unlike the loud lamentations heard in commoner funerals, the queen's mourning was embodied in silence, a slow and breathy movement of cloth, fingers tracing its edges, eyes closed in steady contemplation. This veil became both shield and symbol, an intimate space where grief could breathe without interruption. The weavers of sorrow within the palace, a small group of women, were tasked with preparing the garments and veils for mourning. They were known simply as the weavers of sorrow. Their work was meticulous and sacred. Each thread was handspun from flax grown along the Nile's banks, soaked in mineral-rich water, then woven on looms whose rhythmic clatter echoed softly through the chambers. The weavers added subtle symbols, tiny embroidered lotus buds, spirals representing eternal return, and fine gold thread that caught the candlelight just so. Each veil was unique, crafted not for show, but to serve as a gentle guardian for the wearer's heart. The Queen's chamber of Whisper Smirisk's private quarters held a small alcove called the Chamber of Whispers, where she retreated during times of sorrow. The room was lined with polished alabaster walls and small shelves holding carved ivory combs, alabaster jars filled with scented oils, and tiny scrolls with prayers written in delicate hieroglyphs. Here, she would sit quietly, the silent veil draped over her head, reciting ancient hymns to Osiris, the god of the afterlife. Her voice was soft, almost a breath against the stone. The words spoke of crossing the Duat, the mysterious realm between life and death, and of reunion with loved ones beyond the veil of existence. The slow pace of grief, unlike the modern impulse, too quickly move past loss. Ancient Egyptian mourning was an act of deliberate slowness. Time seemed to dilate. Days were measured in the rhythm of small tasks, folding linens, grinding incense, weaving memories into thread. Visitors were few. Those allowed in spoke softly and moved slowly, as if to not disturb the fragile fabric of sorrow. Food was simple: dates, barley, porridge, and cool water meant to nourish without distracting. Every breath was a prayer, Every gesture, a hymn, the hidden message in the Tom Mersank III's tomb, discovered in the early 20th century in the vast Giza necropolis, is a masterpiece of subtle symbolism. Unlike the grandiosity of her grandfather Khufu's pyramid, her resting place is filled with quiet imagery. Scenes show the queen seated calmly beneath a sycamore tree, the tree of life, offering bread and water to the spirits of the dead. Inscriptions invite her to join the field of reeds, a serene afterlife of endless fields and gentle waters. No grand battles or conquests are depicted, only the soft ritual of passage, a slow crossing into the unknown. The mourning necklace, archaeologists found a delicate necklace among burial goods, a chain of tiny lapis lazuli beads strung together with fine gold wire. Each bead was carefully shaped and polished, some etched with small symbols of eternity and rebirth. This necklace was believed to be worn during mourning rituals, its cool stones resting against the skin as a reminder of the eternal cycle of life and death. It was not just jewelry, it was a talisman of comfort, a slow heartbeat, the echoes of silence today as you lie still now. In your own quiet space, imagine the softness of that blue-black veil brushing gently against your face. Imagine the rhythm of hands, weaving sorrow into silk threads. Imagine the gentle voice of Merisank, whispering ancient hymns through time. There is a calm in mourning, a slow unfolding of the heart that asks not to be rushed. It invites you to sit with your own quiet thoughts, to breathe deeply, and to find solace in the gentle turning of time. The long shadows of loss asterisk in the pale morning light. The palace stirs slowly. The air hums with the faintest sounds, a linen curtain shifting, a bead rolling on stone, a breath held and released. We return to Merisank III's world, stepping now into the prolonged days of mourning, where grief was folded into ritual and time itself stretched thin. Like the delicate threads woven into royal garments, the gathering of women following the death of a close royal family member. A select group of women would convene in the palace's inner chambers. Known as the Keepers of Tears, these women were more than attendants. They were the emotional and spiritual anchors during loss. Their tasks were quiet but essential, preparing mournful hymns, burning fragrant resins, and weaving the intricate linen veils and robes meant for the queen and her closest relatives. These women wore subdued colors, soft whites and muted blues, and moved in deliberate synchrony, as though their steps kept time with the slow, steady pulse of sorrow itself. The veil as a vessel, the silent veil was not simply fabric. It was a vessel for memory and protection. The linen was woven from flax, nurtured on the banks of the Nile, steeped in sacred oils to symbolize purification as the veil touched the queen's skin. It was believed to absorb the sadness she carried, shielding her from the outside world even as it connected her to the spirits of the deceased. The fabric's near transparency created a blurred line between visibility and concealment, mirroring the queen's liminal state between life and death. Music in minor keys within the palace. Musicians were summoned to perform subtle dirges, songs in minor keys, played on harps and flutes crafted from reed and ivory. Unlike festive court music, these melodies were slow, lingering on each note, like the trailing breath of a sigh. The Hesed singers, trained in the art of emotional restraint, performed without words during some ceremonies, their voices rising and falling in melancholic hums. Their songs were meant not to rouse joy, but to cradle sorrow, to hold it gently so it might not overwhelm. The The role of the pharaoh's daughters, the daughters of the pharaoh, held unique roles. In mourning, often too young to participate fully in public rites, they learned the silent language of grief through observation. They would spend hours in quiet corners of the palace, tracing symbols on papyrus or folding petals of lotus flowers as offerings. One such daughter, known only through fragmentary records as Nebet, was said to have embroidered the queen's mourning veil herself, her small hands guided by sorrow and duty. Her work became a symbol of continuity, a thread linking generations through shared loss. A day in the Garden of Shadows, the palace garden, usually a place of celebration, transformed during mourning into a sanctuary of quiet contemplation. The scent of jasmine and myrrh hung heavy in the air. Marshmallows, lotus blossoms, and blue water lilies floated in small pools, their petals closing gently with the fading light. Here, the queen would walk slowly, her silent veil trailing softly behind her, fingers brushing tenderly against leaves and petals. The garden was a space to remember, to feel the presence of those gone, not as absence, but as a subtle fragrance in the air. Letters from the beyond among the rare surviving artifacts, a small folded papyri, bearing messages not to the living, but to the departed. Written in delicate hieratic script, they express wishes for safe passage, comfort, and reunion. One such letter, believed to be penned by Marasank herself, reads, "May your journey be light upon the waters of the west. May the gods greet you with open arms, and may I see you in dreams. Though the ink has faded, the tenderness remains." The morning feast that wasn't in the final days of mourning. Feasts were sometimes held, but unlike the joyous banquets of celebration, these were subdued gatherings. Food was simple: bread, figs, and wine watered down to a gentle sweetness. Guests sat on low stools, sharing stories in hushed tones, their words weaving a tapestry of remembrance. The queen herself would often remain silent, her silent veil pulled tight, listening without speaking. Her grief was private, yet shared the secret chamber beneath the palace archaeologists uncovered. Beneath the palace, a hidden chamber believed to be a mourning sanctuary. It contained small altars, jars of perfumed oils, and wall paintings depicting the deceased surrounded by lotus flowers and serene landscapes. The chamber was accessible only to the queen and the keepers of tears. It was a place to honor the dead away from the eyes of the court, a refuge where sorrow could be expressed without fear. The return of the veil after the official mourning period. The silent veil was carefully folded and stored, not discarded. It was kept in a cedar chest lined with papyrus, alongside other sacred objects. This was no mere relic. It was a talisman, a reminder of loss and endurance, carried in silence through the days and years that followed. As you rest now, imagine the slow passing of days in that palace long ago, the softness of linen, the faint scent of lotus, the low hum of a sorrowful song carried by a breeze. The morning was not an end, but a gentle unfolding, a quiet veil drawn slowly across the heart. Threads that outlived a dynasty asterisk. You are resting beneath a ceiling darkened by centuries of smoke and time, the scent of old oils still faintly lingering. The night whispers through cracked stone windows, stirring dust motes that drift slowly. In the half-light, this is the final chapter of our journey with Marasank III, a queen who understood grief not as a moment, but as a slow, breathing presence woven into every thread of her life and death. The chambers around you are quiet now, but once they hummed with the work of hands that stitched not just linen, but memories and prayers into fabric. The very walls seemed to remember the rhythm of their motion, the gentle tug of a needle, the soft scrape of bone combs, the quiet murmur of names repeated in reverence. The story begins with a scrap of linen, barely 6 inches wide, found folded carefully in a broken jar. On it, faint red ink forms a simple prayer. May Bastet guide my hands and keep my stitching straight. Let no thread forget its path. This is no grand monument. It is a whispered vow, a small hope that even in obscurity, the acts of care, the slow labor of sewing and mending, could hold meaning beyond the fleeting moment. In the needle rumor, space uncovered by archaeologists, there was more than thread and cloth. It was a sanctuary of shared solitude, where women gathered to repair torn garments, rebraid wigs, and soften the rough edges of daily life within the palace. One wall, carefully scratched beneath layers of plaster, bears the inscription, Neferu did not speak today. No further explanation, just a quiet marker of absence, a tender record of silence. The woman Neferu may have been a seamstress, a chambermaid, or simply someone who carried a sorrow too deep for words. Her story is lost, yet her silence echoes through time nearby. A seal identifies a woman called Kenmetneb, known to history as Seshat's Handa rare female scribe, whose work ensured that the names of the harem's residents were never forgotten. Inked carefully onto temple inventories and hymn scrolls, her tablet fragment reads, I write with humility, for I am not remembered, but I remember everything. Kenmetneb's hand traced the fabric of memory, stitching it firmly in place even as the world outside shifted and faded. Beyond the walls of Gurab, the threads of distant lands wove their way into the daily lives of the women within, Kushite, Syrian, Mitanni, and Libyan women brides, hostages. Servants brought with them their own weaving traditions and patterns. Archaeologists found bolts of cloth adorned with unfamiliar geometric designs and dye techniques, the signatures of hands longing for faraway homes. One bolt bore an inked name in a script foreign to Egyptoluian, inscription stating simply, she made this, though her heart was in her father's house. This was not merely fabric, it was a silent testimony to the yearning threaded into every stitch dot in 1920 beneath the northeastern corner of the compound. A tomb was uncovered different from the grandeur of royal burials, yet rich with tenderness. A single wooden coffin, wrapped in layers of linen and adorned with dried flowers blue lotus. Time, tamarisk clay, waiting. Around the wrist of the occupant, a cord tied in 7 loops. Between her fingers, a small wooden stylus. No name was found, no titles or inscriptions, but the care of the burial spoke volumes. Who was she? A teacher, a keeper of memories, a silent guardian. We cannot say. Long after the harem's final breath, a small carved stone appeared atop the broken steps near the main entrance. On it, the image of a woman with eyes closed, hands folded, surrounded by a scratched demotic inscription. She kept the women safe. She remembered the songs. She did not leave, though likely placed centuries later. This stone is a testament to the enduring reverence for those whose names have slipped beyond history's grasp. The once vibrant compound of Garobe slowly succumbed to time. Floodwaters from the Fayum rose. Trade routes shifted, and dynasties fell away. Walls cracked, colors faded, and silence settled. Yet in the dust, traces of a garden survived, a small patch where sweet flag, papyrus, and calendula had been lovingly tended. A final act of care amid the ruins. History often favors the loud and monumental kings, wars, conquests. But here, in this quiet place, it is the small, slow acts that endure. A piece of linen, a carved comb, a whispered name. The women of Guru were not rulers. They did not seek glory. They remembered, and through their memory, Egypt remained whole. Close your eyes now. Feel the softness of linen against skin, the faint scent of lotus drifting on a gentle breeze. Hear the distant murmur of voices, steady and unhurried, folding grief into the passing of days. The music fades. The last candle burns low. The women have gone to sleep. And in this stillness, you are not alone. Asterisk, the night deepens, and the palace settles into a gentle rhythm of whispered breaths and slow footsteps. Beyond the walls, the desert wind stirs softly, carrying with it the scent of distant cedar and faint echoes of a lifelong past. Here, where time seems to fold upon itself, the quiet acts of care endure as an invisible thread stitching the present to the ancient past. The women who tended to the queen's needs were often unseen, their stories barely traced in the fragile parchment of history. Yet, through their careful hands, they wove the very fabric of the royal household's daily existence. In the dim light of oil lamps, they mended torn linens with delicate stitches, each loop a silent prayer. They crafted the intricate braids and coiffures that crowned the queen, using combs carved from ivory and scented oils distilled from rare flowers. Each gesture was slow, deliberate, filled with the reverence of ritual. The queen's garments themselves spoke volumes. Layers upon layers of finely woven linen, some so sheer they shimmered like the surface of the Nile at dawn. Many bore faint traces of dyes deep indigos and soft ochres, supplied in patterns that mirrored the lotus and papyrus, sacred symbols of rebirth and resilience. These textiles were not mere clothing. They were embodiments of protection and remembrance, cocooning the queen in a tangible embrace of continuity. In one secluded corner of the palace, archaeologists discovered a small box, its lid cracked and worn, but still holding a treasure of tiny objects. Among them were beads fashioned from lapis lazuli, carnelian, and turquoise, strung together with such care that their original purpose seemed as much spiritual as decorative. Some beads bore minuscule carvings, eyes ankhs, and other symbols, meant to ward off harm. These necklaces, likely worn during mourning rites, served as talismans, bridging the mortal and divine. But perhaps the most poignant relic was a tiny wooden stylus found clasped in the hand of a woman buried in the palace grounds. This simple tool, used for writing on soft clay or papyrus, symbolizes the silent voice of those who chronicled lives from the shadows, the scribes, the record keepers, and the mourners who preserved memory when voices faltered. Mourning in Maurice. Time was a dance of paradoxes intense, yet restrained, public yet private, visible yet shrouded in mystery. The Queen's court observed these rituals with an elegance that belied their emotional depth. Tears were not shed openly. Instead, sorrow was folded into the slow weaving of veils, the careful folding of garments, the chanting of hymns in hushed tones in the courtyards. Lotus blossoms were offered in quiet devotion, their petals symbolizing the unfolding of the soul and the promise of renewal beyond death. Women dressed in soft white linens would gather under the shade of sycamore trees, whose branches were believed to shelter the spirits of the dead. Here, they shared stories of those who had passed, keeping their memories alive through whispered tales and gentle songs. One such story spoke of the Queen's own mother, a woman whose strength and grace had shaped Merisank's understanding of loss. It was said she taught the queen that morning was not a rupture, but a transformation, a slow weaving of past and present, life and death, into a tapestry of enduring love. As days stretched into weeks, the palace shifted from a place of bustling ceremony to a sanctuary of quiet reflection. The queen herself was often seen retreating to the Chamber of Whispers, a secluded room adorned with alabaster walls and shelves lined with ancient texts and sacred oils. Here, wrapped in her silent veil, she recited hymns to Osiris, seeking solace in the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Outside, the garden remained a place of solace, the gentle rustle of reeds and the soft murmur of water flowing through small channels offered a serene backdrop to the queen's solitary walks. The fragrance of jasmine and myrrh mingled with the earthiness of lotus flowers, creating a sensory tapestry that soothed the heart and spirit in the quiet moments before dawn. The queen's attendants would light slender candles, their flames flickering like fragile hopes against the encroaching darkness. These lights symbolized the persistence of memory, the unbroken thread connecting the living to those who had journeyed beyond. And so, in the slow unfolding of time, grief was transformed, not erased or overcome, but embraced as a companion, silent presence woven into the fabric of daily life. As you rest now, imagine yourself in the cool shadows of that ancient palace, feeling the soft brush of linen, hearing the faint cadence of a hymn carried on a breeze. Let the stillness envelop you, and know that through memory and ritual, love endures beyond the veil. Story 5. The loom beneath the laurel, the weavers who shaped a queen's legacy. Asterisk, the thread that began in silence. Asterisk, good evening, dear listener. You've arrived once again in the soft hush of the past. Tonight, allow your breath to slow. Feel the weight of linen across your chest, the stillness of a world before clocks, before engines, before even glass windows. We return now to ancient Egypt, not to its pyramids, nor its battlefields, but to a quieter place, a weaving room tucked behind the pillars of a queen's household. In this chamber, surrounded by threads and silence, the story of a forgotten legacy was spun. The room, no one spoke of the queen in question. Her name was Sataya, first great royal wife to Thutmose III, lived during Egypt's 18th dynasty. Around 1450 BCE, her name appears in carvings and temple walls. But her story, like that of many women in power, is woven with more questions than answers. But we begin not with Sataya herself, but with the women who spun the fabric of her life. Quite literally, step now into the pernet, the weaving house within the royal complex. You are barefoot. The rush matting is soft beneath your soles. The air is cool, filled with the scent of cedar and flax oil. The looms stand in rows, each tall as a man, with warp threads stretched tight like the strings of an unseen harp. Here, 20 or more women work in silence. Some are slaves taken in war. Others are daughters of craftsmen, trained from youth to weave for the court. They wear plain linen dresses, tucked at the shoulder with bone pins. Their fingers move slowly and deliberately, not hurried, because time here flows in the rhythm of the thread. They are weaving the robes the queen will wear to mourn a death, or celebrate a harvest, or meet the priests of Karnak, the first strand. Flax, the story of a royal garment, begins long before it touches a queen's skin. It begins in muddy fields beside the Nile, where flax grows straight and tall, its pale blue flowers opening with the sun. Women harvest the stalks by hand, soaking them in water until the outer layers rot away. The the remaining fibers pale gold and whisper. Tin are dried and combed and spun by spindle. It is slow work, hours to make a single thread, days for a skein, weeks for a robe. But this slowness is holy, a kind of prayer in motion, and every robe the queen wears is born of this quiet labour. The weaver's hymn the women sing softly as they work not in full voice, but in breathy undertones that carry like wind through reeds. Thread of Ra, thread of the Nile, may your path be smooth, your burden light. Twist and turn and carry the name of the mother, of the queen, of the flame. This is no idle song. It is spell and protection, a way to call upon the gods, to bless the fabric they create. The weavers believe each robe holds memory, that to wrap a queen in cloth is to shield her soul from evil. And so they hum and knot and bind, weaving more than patterns into linen. The queen's first Robosatia, daughter of a lesser wife, was not born to wear royal linen, but when she became first wife to the pharaoh, everything changed. The day she was crowned queen, the women of the weaving house were given 3 days to create her coronation robe, a shimmering white linen gown, embroidered with lotus and falcon motifs, and hemmed with golden fringe. They worked through the night. Lamp oil smoked their eyes. Their fingers bled. But the robe was finished. And when Satire stepped into the light of the festival court, the sun caught the weave and made it shine like water. The people gasped. They saw a queen. But the weavers saw something else, a tapestry of their labor walking upright through history. The invisible hands in ancient Egypt. Artisans were rarely named. Stone carvers and scribes might earn a line on a tomb. But the weavers, their hands shaped beauty and ceremony, but their names were lost intentionally, erased, forgotten, and yet their lives remain. In fingerprints pressed into drying clay loom weights in a single bone needle, dropped behind a column in a poem. Scratched into a pot, she wove the hem with broken hands. He kissed her fingers. She did not flinch. These fragments speak of women who lived not in fame, but in the soft repetition of mastery. Women who wove stories into silence. The patterned code Egyptian linen was more than white cloth. Patterns were coded messages. A row of papyrus stems meant rebirth. Chevron stripes marked purification. A band of lapis-dyed threads meant mourning. Each pattern was chosen with care. Satire's mourning robes bore a repeating pattern of spirals, like coiled snake symbols of protection, but also of life hidden, curling inward in grief. When her infant son died, her only child, she wore that robe for 40 days. She did not speak, but the robe spoke for her, and the women who wove it mourned with her. Stitch by stitch, asterisk a chamber of threads and tears in. The back corner of the weaving house, past the looms and the oil lamps, was a smaller room, warm and thick with the scent of beeswax and myrrh. This was the chamber of finishing, where the final threads were tied, loose ends tucked, and borders stitched by hand. But it was also a room of grief. Here, the women came when they had lost someone, a child to fever, a sister to childbirth, friend to the whims of the Nile. They brought scraps of linen and wove mourning bands. Narrow strips they wore around their wrists or ankles, embroidered with names too sacred to speak aloud. The queen herself, Satire visited once. She entered. Without an escort, her veil pulled low, she brought no royal guard, no fanfare, only a narrow piece of cloth dyed the deepest blue-black, marked with tiny knots in the shape of a reed boat. She sat among the weavers and said nothing. They said nothing, too, only the sound of fingers threading memory. The child at the Lamum, the weaver's, was a girl of no more than 11, called Pi. She had come to the palace with her mother, a gifted spinner, after her village was consumed by rising Nile waters, too young to work a full loom. Pahinu carried water, sorted spindles, and collected fallen threads. She watched everything, her fingers, learned by observing the flick of a wrist, the knot of a tassel, the way a weaver spoke to cloth as though it could listen. One day, alone, she began to stitch the eye of Horus into a discarded scrap. A senior weaver saw, and instead of scolding, she whispered, "You remember your people through your fingers. Don't stop." Years later, Pahinu would design the queen's final veil. Linen for the afterlife. Egyptian belief held that linen wrapped the soul for eternity. The dead were mummified in dozens, sometimes hundreds of layers of cloth, each with its own invocation or charm. For queens, these wrappings were special, a blend of sheer perfumed inner linens and heavier outer sheets, patterned with sacred symbols. Satya, in her final years, ordered a set of burial linens from the weaving house, not out of morbid fear, but as a way of preparing, slowly, thoughtfully. Each piece bore a different design: a robe patterned with blue lotus for renewal, a sash with swallows for the soul's flight, a veil with gold threads woven into spirals to mirror the stars. The queen never saw her tomb, but she touched each fabric before it was placed in storage, whispering thanks to the hands that made them. Threads of influence, though her reign was short. Satya's garments began a quiet revolution. Before her, queens wore plainer robes in public, saving rich patterns for ritual. But Satya brought the sacred into the everyday. She made symbolic dress an extension of power. Priestesses took notice, then wives of viziers, then temple dancers. Within 2 generations, linen became not only royal but political. Designs became statements, weavers became advisors. In the weaving house, they began teaching girls how to read pattern codes like text. "Read the thread," they said. "It speaks more honestly than ink." The return of the laurel, one of Satya's most famous ceremonial robes, bore the image of the laurel, a plant not native to Egypt, but traded from Crete and the Aegean. The robe, woven with green-dyed thread and tiny gold discs shaped like leaves, became known as the laurel mantle. It was worn when she greeted ambassadors, when she received the sacred crocodile priests, when she blessed grain at harvest. Over time, laurel became a symbol for her memory, whispered by temple singers as a kind of reverent nickname, "She who wears the green crown." But the weavers had their own name for the robe, the thread that watched, a loom left waiting after Satya's death. The weaving house fell quiet for many weeks. The looms were dusted, the oil lamps dimmed, but no thread was strung. Then, one day, Pihinuth, girl who had once sewn in secret, stepped forward. She tied new warp threads on Satya's loom. She began to weave again. Not a robe for a queen, but a tapestry, a memory. The patterns that whispered power. *The sun has not yet risen, but already the weaving house stirs, not with noise, but with presence, the kind of quiet movement that feels sacred, as if even breath has a rhythm. Beneath your bare feet, the rush mat is cool, slightly damp from the night. A single oil lamp flickers in the corner, casting long, soft shadows across the wooden frames of half-finished looms. You are in the 2nd year after Queen Satya's death. The royal court has moved on, as courts do, with new alliances and younger wives stepping into favored roles. But here, In this quiet chamber behind the temple walls of Karnak, the queen is still remembered, not in statues or inscriptions, but in threads, in patterns, in the daily gestures of the women who once clothed her, and among them is Pahinu, no longer a girl. The loom-inherited Painus fingers are stained with indigo. Her arms have grown strong from turning the warp beam. Her voice, still soft, carries weight now. When she ties a thread, others pause to watch. She is no longer an apprentice. She is a master weaver, and she has inherited the loom once reserved for Queen Satia's ceremonial robes. It stands alone, taller than the others, with small carved markings along its wooden sidesglyphs that signify protection, water, and feminine power. No one knows who first carved them. Perhaps Satia herself, perhaps one of the silent generations before, each morning. Pahinu blesses the loom before she begins. She does not speak the words aloud, but she thinks them carefully. May the threads remember her name. May the pattern keep her soul awake. The queen in pattern unlike, the king's image etched in granite and bronze. The queen's legacy lived in lighter material fabrics that moved, flowed, vanished. Most of Satia's robes have long turned to dust, claimed by time, beetles, and floodwaters, but her patterns remain. Here is how they survive, in teaching scrolls handed from weaver to weaver, with painted illustrations of stylized hawks and spiraling reeds. In a preserved tunic fragment buried near Luxor, the hem embroidered with alternating laurel leaves and vultures' symbols of healing and divine motherhood. In a pair of sandals gifted to the temple of Hathor, their leather straps wrapped in silk dyed the exact shade of dawn blue, a color said to reflect Satia's eyes. Every symbol carried meaning. Every line in a pattern was a sentence, a language of cloth. When foreign eyes arrived, the weaving house was once a private place, known only to women, only to Egypt. But Satia had brought diplomatic change. During her reign, she received envoys from Mycenae, Cyprus, and Byblos women who arrived not just to pledge alliance, but to observe. Among them was a woman named Taduapa, a princess from the far lands of Hatti, tall, with hair bound in rings of silver, and cloth draped like water over her arms. She came to learn how Egyptian queens dressed and how their power was expressed in warp and weft. She brought gifts, blue wool from the mountains, dyes made from crushed beetles, and embroidery needles of polished obsidian. She also brought questions, and she watched Pahinu at work. Fascinated, for hours she traced her fingers along border designs, asking softly, "Why does this spiral tighten here? Why do the reeds point inward? What is hidden in the hem?" And Pahinu answered not with words, but by showing her how to hold the shuttle, how to feel the rhythm. Their hands spoke a shared language, a pattern that should not have been but. Not every thread was meant to be woven. One evening, a bolt of cloth was brought from the palace by the new queen's steward. It was thick, coarsely spun, dyed a deep imperial red. With it came an order: copy the robes Satia wore at the grain festival, but change the motifs, replace laurel with papyrus, falcons with cobras. It was a political statement, a quiet attempt to erase. Pahinu stood before the bolt for a long time. She did not cry. She did not protest. She simply walked to the loom, took a plain spindle of white thread, and tied it in the shape of a knotted flower. Then another, then another. The other weavers followed by morning. The cloth had been but covered edge to edge with unbroken lines of invisible blossoms. From a distance, it looked blank, but under sunlight, under certain angles, It told a story that would not be silenced. Asterisk the memory in the stitches, in the quiet between weaving shifts. The weavers gathered in the cooling shade of the fig trees behind the temple wall. There, away from the tension of palace orders and changing dynasties, they rested their fingers and shared quiet talk. But sometimes they didn't speak at all. Instead, they touched the hems of each other's robes, searching for meaning in the patterns that edged the fabric. Here, a braid stitched with broken reeds, mourning for a mother lost in childbirth. There, a single fish embroidered into the shoulder a child, born under the river's blessing. On Pananu's own sash, just beneath the belt, 3 golden lotus petals wrapped around a line of black thread. The mark of someone who once wept alone and no longer does in Egypt, where names could disappear faster than floodwaters. Patterns remembered what words could not. Even the priests who passed through the weaving rooms seemed to respect this. One, an old lector named Judahotep, once paused beside Panu's loom, his fingers lightly brushing the laurel pattern she was restoring. He did not ask what it meant. Instead, he said quietly, "The gods see even what you weave in silence." And then he walked on. A tapestry for the moon when Satya was alive. She had commissioned a large ceremonial cloth, never completed in her life, time meant to be hung from the columns of the temple of Mut. During lunar festivals, the design had been ambitious, a full moon cradled by 2 laurel trees, with stars woven in silver thread and birds mid-flight along the borders. But when she died, the order had been forgotten. The priests focused on newer queens. The cloth, half-woven, lay bundled in the corner of the storehouse, the silver thread tarnished, the laurel outlines unfinished. Pahinio discovered it by accident, searching for spindles. She unfolded the bundle, and the dust fell away like breath. For weeks after, she and 2 elder weavers worked each night by lamplight, unrolling the threads, redyeing the edges, stitching stars in secret. They said nothing to the palace. On the night of the harvest moon, they hung it between 2 columns of the weaving hall. Not in public, not for show, only for themselves. The fabric caught the moonlight, and the silver stars shimmered like waves in the silence. Pahinio whispered, "Now she is remembered." The hidden needle, every weaver had her own. A small needle, carved from bone or wood, smoothed by hand, kept wrapped in a pouch beside her work. Pananus was different. It had belonged to her mother, and before her, her grandmother women who spun thread by the light of distant suns, long before the queen's name was ever spoken. On one end, it bore a single glyph, the looped cross of Anklife. When Pahinio sewed her own burial sash, she stitched the name of each woman she had ever known into the hem. No one would see it, but she would know, and that was enough. The last pattern of Satyati, final garment Pahinio ever wove in Satya's memory, was unlike any other. It was not a robe or veil, but a long, thin run of 7 cubits in length, designed to be laid over a stone altar during the New Year's rites of cleansing. Into its weave, she stitched everything, every symbol the queen had loved: lotus, laurel, spirals, stars. But in between them, barely visible, were smaller marks: a reed boat with 3 oars, a kneeling girl holding flax, a spindle turning toward the left each, a private echo of Satya's life, not seen by public eyes. When it was done, she laid it out beneath the columns of Karnak just before dawn. No ceremony, no announcement, but those who passed by slowed their steps. One priestess touched the cloth with reverent fingers and said, "There is grief in this fabric, but also forgiveness." the veil that outlived the Queen Asterisk, you are sitting in the shade of a low stone wall. The morning sun still gentle upon the dusty flagstones. There is the faint rustle of linen robes in the breeze, and the far-off cry of ibises overhead. Time moves slowly here, as though each breath of wind is drawn through a loom too vast to see. It has been nearly a decade since Queen Satire's death. Her name is still spoken, if softly, in the corners of the palace on the lips of old gardeners, among the temple dancers when they fasten their belts, and in the weaving house, where Pahinu still works the same loom every morning. But change is rising, slow as floodwaters. A new queen commands the palace. The court has grown younger, sharper. Linen patterns now lean foreign, favouring Mycenaean waves over lotus coils. The laurel once Satire's emblem is seen less and less. And so, Pahino begins to work on a final piece. Not a robe, not a tapestry, a veil with no occasion. This veil was never commissioned. No court order, no festival decree, no priest's approval. Pahinu began it in silence, one ordinary day, as others spun threads or sang softly over the dying coals. She took up a length of white flax, already combed and bleached. Its texture was so fine it barely whispered as it passed through her fingers. She spun the weft so tight it sang. The veil was wide enough to cover a woman's shoulders, and long enough to sweep the floor behind her. A formal veil, ceremonial in its proportions. But Pahenu told no one what it was for each morning. She returned to it, moving her shuttle with quiet reverence. Some days she wove for hours. Other days she touched no thread at all. It was not a garment of sorrow, nor triumph, nor marriage. It was, simply, a veil that remembered. Symbols beneath the threaden-like satire. Earlier veils woven with overt symbols of power and fertility. This one whispered in subtler tones. Along the edge, Pahinu stitched a row of oval sloop-like cartouches, but empty in the center. She wove a laurel leaf inside a spiral, and beneath that, a braid pattern with 3 threads, each slightly different in shade. Some said it looked like a broken river, others, like a path turning back upon itself. No one asked its meaning, but when the older weavers passed by, they placed a hand on the frame in quiet understanding. They recognized the language, even if they could not translate it. The visit from the scribe one morning, while Pahinu worked alone, a man entered the weaving house unusual, but not forbidden. He was older, robed in white, with ink-stained fingers and a scroll tucked beneath one arm. He introduced himself only as Beckham, a court scribe tasked with recording the textile stores for temple offerings, but his eyes lingered too long on Pahinu's loom. "I knew the queen once," he said softly, eyes following the spiral at the veil's center. "She asked me once if ink could hold a soul." "And what did you tell her?" Pahinu asked, without looking up. Beckham smiled. "I told her ink fades, but thread, thread listens." He left a small jar of blue pigment behind. "In case your thread needs sky," he said, and walked into the sun. A thread from the river one evening. Pahinu walked alone to the banks of the Nile, carrying a small pouch tucked within her robe. The moon was full, and the water lapped gently against the muddy shore. Crocodiles were distant that night, their eyes like glints of obsidian among the reeds. She knelt at the edge and withdrew. From the pouch, a spindle one she hadn't used. In years, it was carved from acacia wood, worn smooth by her mother's hands. She dipped it into the river, not to spin it, not to dye thread, only to bless it. The spindle floated for a moment before sinking slightly, taking in the scent, the memory, the weight of the Nile. When she returned to the weaving house, she wrapped the spindle in clean linen and placed it beside the veil. From that night on, she wove with a different rhythm, as if the river itself had lent her its tempo. A pattern only seen in sleep. The veil grew slowly, not from haste, but from deep intention. One morning, Pahinu arrived before the others, and the half-finished veil shimmered strangely in the dawn light. A spiral that hadn't been there before, not woven, not dyed, just ... present, as though it had emerged from within the threads themselves. She touched it. The cloth was smooth, no knots, no texture. It was said that sometimes, when love and memory and devotion pass through the fingers long enough, cloth begins to dream, and perhaps this veil was dreaming now. The woman from the south. A few weeks later, a stranger arrived, a tall woman with sun-dark skin and long fingers, wrapped in robes of Nubian weave. Her name was Asenet, and she had once been a court attendant in the south during Satire's final days. She had come, she said, not to speak of the queen's illness or her final procession, but of her silence. Toward the end, Asenet whispered. The queen said little, but she wore a plain veil, tied once around her shoulder, and she never took it off. Was it this veil? A young weaver asked. Asenet looked to Panu's loom. Her expression changed, became distant, reverent. No, she said, but it remembers that one. And with that, she left behind a small box, sandalwood, sealed with wax dot inside. A single bronze clasp shaped like a laurel leaf. The queen's final threads. In her final days, Satire had written no edicts, no speeches. She had left behind no child, no grand tomb, no colossal obelisk, but she left something rarer. A trunk of unfinished linens, dozens of them veils, sashes, fragments of tunics, all marked with the symbols she had loved. Red boats, falcons, stars, laurel. Some were stitched by her own hand, some bore notes in faded ink, for the temple girls, for mourning the rain, to cover the mouth of the child not yet born. These were not royal things, they were human, and when Pahinu was finally permitted to see them, she sat in silence, letting her fingers rest over the frayed edges. She knew what she had to do.